Hi, my name's Alon Ilsar and I'm a drummer, composer, improviser, sound designer, instrument designer. I'm also a disability advocate and an interspecies collaborator, but more on that later. I first want to acknowledge the people of the Kulin Nation, where we're filming from today at Monash University's Sensi Lab, and pay my respect to elders past and present. So I thought I'd start today's talking about my practice as a drummer, an acoustic drummer, and that tension I had as I developed a love for electronic music and wanting to incorporate that. And I'll do that by presenting some of my ideas as a drummer that developed by myself, but also ideas of other percussionists, other composers, give a bit of a kind of history about acoustic sound, but then also talk about electronic music and how composers were inspired to find new sounds and new ways of making electronic music. And then by the end, hopefully we can figure out ways of how these two can live together. So when I was 11, I started playing drums, and by the age of 15, I got my first gig playing a wedding, and I went, whoa, you can get paid for this stuff. And I just got really excited by just playing drums in every context I could with everyone that I would be interested in playing. And I ended up actually playing in a circus with no animals, and really watching the performers intently as I was scoring them, or marking them as we call it in the circus. And that started to reveal a fascination for me between movement and sound that I'll kind of come back to later. So around the same time that I was playing in the circus, I'd be at home in the studio making electronic music, really complicated electronic music that was impossible to play. And I would layer things together, record field recordings. Like, I was really interested in what were the possibilities as a composer of doing all these things. So I might give a brief background of what I think electronic music is. Basically, electronic music is anything that comes out of speakers, as far as I'm concerned. And if you think about it, there was a moment in our history where all the music we heard was played in front of you. It was played in concerts, it was played in cafes. If you wanted to hear someone play something, a song, you had to ask nicely and maybe pay them a bit of money through buying them a drink or whatever. Like, this was the interaction. Now we can just pull out our phone and play any song that anyone's ever recorded. So back in the 1900s, a start, there was actually a lot of concern. What's going to happen when we start recording music and playing it back to each other and losing that connection that we have with musicians that are playing the music in our presence? And there was one concern particularly from an acoustic instrument inventor by the name of John Sousa, who invented the sousaphone, which is the tuba that you can walk around with. So he invented this way that a marching band could have a bass player, the tuba player, walking around with everyone else. And he actually wrote back in 1906, he said, "I foresee a marked deterioration in American music and musical taste, an interruption in the musical development of the country, and a host of other injuries to music in its artistic manifestations, by virtue, or rather by vice, of the multiplication of the various music-producing machines." So, you think he was right? Do you think like he had cause to be concerned about what this would do to our society, to have these machines come and take over? So I like to think of it, I think, a different way. What are the advantages that we have of acoustic music? And what are the advantages that we have of electronic music? And how can we bring this together as we develop new instruments, new pieces, new ways of listening to music, new performances? So for me, acoustic music is just so real. Like, the connection between the movement and the sound is inseparable. There is a clear connection. And, you know, just shaping this, I don't know if it reminds me of being a baby, but it is so early on in our development that we start to learn about our world through the way that sound and movement interacts together. Acoustic music performances are also really inspiring because you're hearing the sound from where it comes. You're not hearing it from somewhere else. You're seeing the action, you're seeing the performers. This is what inspires me about acoustic music. Acoustic music is also so immediate. It allows you to react to what other performers are doing. It allows you to improvise with other musicians, also react to what the audience might be doing, react to the room and the way it sounds. So there was a great writer and composer, R. Murray Schafer, who split sounds into 3 categories. Geophony, the sounds originating from the Earth's natural processes, such as blowing of wind or movement of whales. Biophony, the sounds emerging from animal sources like whale vocalizations or birdsong. And anthrophony, the soundscape defined by man-made sources like speech or road noise, and yes, electronic music. And this is where we start to develop this tension between what our natural world sounds like and what our cities started to sound like. And he points out that even the first clock in the tower, how that would have changed the soundscape of how we listened and what we heard. So I thought maybe it's worth taking a moment to just have a listen. What are we hearing around us? What are the acoustic sounds that we're hearing? Or maybe some electronic sounds as well. Like in this room, I'm hearing like the air conditioning. That's always something that you hear in places like this. I'm hearing like some maybe traffic far off, like beyond us. So what are you hearing when you're in your space? And can you divide them into those 3 categories? Can you hear wind? Can you hear birds? Can you hear man-made talking, the refrigerator? So this to me has been an inspiration for a lot of electronic composers. They've been listening and they want to take the sounds they're hearing and incorporate it into their pieces. They want to replay it to people. And this is the advantage of electronic music. So with electronic music, we now can kind of package up these acoustic sounds and replay them in the order that we want to play them. And some of the earliest people that did this were the musique concrète composers in France in the 1940s. And they had to actually cut up tape. Like now we can just grab a microphone, download GarageBand, make anything. We can do it on our phones. We can play it back on our phones. Back then they'd have to cut up these little bits of tape. They'd have to measure, okay, 1 centimeter. When I play it at this rate, it's going to take exactly a second. So I'm going to cut all my tape up into these 1 centimeter segments so they can be perfectly in time. And like that's quite tedious, but also revolutionary. They were really wanting to make this music. And the music they made, they refer to as acousmatic. So acousmatic means that it has no body. It has no place that you hear the sound. And it's a term that comes from ancient Greece, where Pythagoras would give lectures like this behind a black curtain. And he thought that this way, if you just focused on the sound of my voice or his voice, you would take more in, you'd be more focused, you wouldn't be kind of distracted by seeing the movement that's creating the sound. So do you think you're more focused now that I'm in black? So these musicians of the musique concrète scene, they would manipulate sound in all these different ways that we can now as well. And we can do a lot more now, but they would play things faster. So they would play things faster, slower, backwards, backwards, forwards.
They would change the pitch.
They would loop things. They would put them in an order that made a pattern, they would put them in a pattern. They would do all these things to sound that previous composers had done while scoring instruments. And they used to present their music in the same way that Pythagoras would give a lecture, just a couple of speakers in a room. And what do you think about that? Is that an interesting way to present music? Do you think you can go to a concert and just sit there and stare at the ceiling? Or what does that do to your experience of listening? So since these early pioneers of electronic music, obviously electronic music has come a long way and it's become extremely accessible. Now anyone can make music anywhere. There are a lot of ways to support people with disability to make music through different interfaces. There's a lot of ways to learn to make music at home. It's just really amazing how many people can now access music making. What I'm interested in is how do you bring electronic music to live performance? So I had a problem when I was starting out as an electronic music composer. I wanted to present my work to people in the space with them. And one of my first performances was just sitting behind a laptop and sound would come out of the speakers and there'd be no really any movement from me, no real engagement. And being a drummer, I knew what it felt to move and create stuff that was of the moment to the audience. So I had this real tension. How do you combine this love that I have for electronic music and this complicated music you can make on a computer with the transparency, the expressiveness, all the things you can do on acoustic instruments, including improvising with other musicians? How do you combine those two? And there are a lot of people, a lot of great musicians and electronic producers that are trying to combine those two. Can you think of any? Are there any performances you've been to recently where you're really excited about how there's maybe visuals and lights and electronic music and a live band, how they've incorporated all these things in a way? I can think of incredible bands that I've seen in my time. Portishead comes to mind. I saw them and they have an incredible visual display. They have 2 drummers that you can watch if you're not interested in the visuals. They obviously have singer, guitarists, people to watch, and they incorporate electronics into that in some way. And it's often, for me, the drummers that are leading the kind of charge in bringing electronic music into these live contexts. So for example, Bjork's drummer, Manu Delago, he plays an electronic drum kit and he really sounds incredible when you see him live. He's physical and you can hear these incredibly high produced samples being played. You could close your eyes and think that it was electronic music and it wasn't being played, but you have the option to also open your eyes and engage in the fact that it's being made in that moment. Other drummers incorporate other ways of more improvising and getting away from the electronic drum kit, using maybe contact mics on drum kits, like Gunther Muller is a great example of that. Or there's some technology like sensory percussion that is being used on top of acoustic drum kits to kind of add more layers of electronic sound. There's also a great Melbourne drummer, Robbie Avername, that uses robotics to play the drum kit around him as he plays drums and incorporate electronics in that way. So although his sounds are completely acoustic, he's involving these other electronic means of producing sound as he plays and improvises. Coming in it from the other direction, there's a lot of incredible electronic producers who, when they go to perform live, are really trying to ask the question, well, how should I do this? What should I do that's different to just sitting at the laptop, pressing play? A lot of them are incorporating huge visual, sometimes buildings in a sense, like Amon Tobin. His show that he toured with a giant visual installation was quite overwhelming maybe to some people, but it was definitely something to look at. Ortega, who's an incredible electronic duo, they have been going the other way. They actually play in completely blackened rooms. They even put black tape over the exit signs in an attempt to go, well, there is nothing to look at when we perform, so let's have nothing to see. And then there are people who are using surround sound speakers, perhaps, a way of moving sound around a room so that the audience feel like they're inside a more natural environment, perhaps. And there are others that incorporate cameras that track audience members and project that onto the screen to try to involve the audience more. So there's a lot of ways that electronic musicians are also trying to bring and elevate their live practice. So to finish off this first episode, I want you to think about what are some things that we can do in the future to elevate this type of performance? What are some instruments that you think will be created in the future or that you can build in the future that will bring together electronic and acoustic music? And in the next episode, I'm going to reveal the way that I've dealt with bringing together the expressiveness and transparency of acoustic music and the endless possibilities of electronic music.